It was a stormy night, and I was just trying to get home. I was 21 years old back then. My car had been acting up all day, the engine struggling against the cold. Eventually, it overheated and stalled in the middle of nowhere. I tried restarting it, but the temperature gauge was still in the red. I didn't want to risk ruining my car, so I had no choice but to get out and start walking, hoping to find a bus stop or someone who could help. The wind howled around me, and every crack of thunder made my heart pound harder. Rain lashed against my face, soaking my clothes as I trudged forward, my arms wrapped around myself for warmth. The road stretched into the distance, empty except for the occasional flicker of headlights far in the distance. After walking for a few minutes, I saw the faint glow of taillights ahead. My relief was short-lived as I noticed the car's back door was open. A man stood there pulling something heavy from the back seat. He moved slowly, methodically, as if he was trying not to make any noise. I was about to call out to him when a sudden flash of lightning illuminated the scene, and I saw it. A lifeless body, limp in his grasp. My breath caught in my throat. He was a murderer. I instinctively stumbled back, my mind screaming at me to run, but my legs felt frozen for a moment, paralyzed by fear. The man turned his head slightly. He was wearing a black hat. I couldn't see his face. That was enough to snap me out of my daze. I turned and bolted. Fear surged through me, and I sprinted down the desolate road. My footsteps splashed through the wet pavement, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I didn't dare look back, but I could hear his heavy boots pounding against the ground. He had seen me. He was chasing me. The rain made it hard to see, my hair sticking to my face as I pushed forward. My lungs burned, my heart threatened to burst out of my chest. The world around me was nothing but darkness and the storm's deafening roar. I turned a sharp corner, nearly slipping in the mud, and forced myself forward. After what felt like forever, I thought I had lost him. I stumbled into a metro station, my body trembling from exhaustion and cold. I pressed myself into the shadows, trying to steady my breathing. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting eerie, shifting shadows. Then a man walked in. He was tall, dressed in a rain-soaked jacket. My instincts screamed at me to run again, but I was too exhausted. He seemed pretty friendly and passed a smile, saying, "I thought I might miss it, but as always, it's late." Desperate, I told him everything. About my car, the body, the man who had chased me. He listened carefully, his eyes narrowing as he processed my words. Then he suggested I call the police. I hesitated. What if they don't believe me? What if they think I'm just some crazy girl? He nodded understandingly. "You're just shaken up. Try to stay calm." Each crash of thunder sent shivers down my spine. Then another figure approached the shelter, a second man. My stomach twisted in fear. We heard footsteps outside, slow, deliberate. My pulse raced. The first man suddenly grabbed my arm. "Come with me, we need to hide." I didn't know if I should trust him, but with danger looming outside, I followed. We went out of the metro station and he led me to a nearby old house, fumbling with the lock before pushing the door open. Once inside, he bolted the doors and shut the curtains. "Stay quiet, don't move," he whispered. A knock at the door. My breath hitched. "Is anyone there?" the man outside called. The first man didn't respond right away. "Who are you?" he finally asked. "I know there's a girl with you," the man outside said. "Let her go." Fear gripped my chest. The first man warned him, "Leave or I'll call 911. A tense silence. Then the man outside said, "Fine, but know this, I'm a cop." Footsteps receded. I exhaled sharply, relief washing over me. But then I noticed something. The hat the first man wore. It was the same as the one the murderer had been wearing. My blood turned to ice. Before I could scream, his hand clamped over my mouth. I struggled, thrashing against him, and finally let out a muffled scream. The cop outside must have heard because he came charging back. The door burst open and the officer yanked me away. I gasped, coughing for breath. But when I turned back to point at my attacker, the house was empty. He was gone. Shaken but determined, I led the cop back to where I had seen the dead body. We searched, but there was nothing there. No body, no signs of a struggle. Just the wind howling through the dark, stormy night. I made it home safely that night. But it was unforgettable. No matter how much time passes, I will always wonder, who was that man and where did he go? It was a lonely stretch of road, the kind that made your skin crawl the longer you drove. The night was thick with darkness, my headlights barely illuminating the winding asphalt ahead. I had been driving for hours, exhaustion settling deep into my bones, when I saw something ahead, a woman standing in the middle of the road. She was waving her arms frantically, her silhouette barely visible in the dim glow of my high beams. My heart pounded. I hesitated before slowing down and pulling up beside her. She looked disheveled, her hair wild, eyes wide with terror. I rolled down my window, but something in my gut twisted. What if this was a trap? My fingers hovered over the controls before I quickly rolled it back up, leaving just an inch of space. I cleared my throat. What happened? Are you hurt? Her voice trembled as she choked out, "Please, help me." That's when I noticed the man. He stood just a few feet behind her, barely visible in the shadows. He wasn't moving, just watching. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. Something wasn't right. Then suddenly he lunged. I gasped, expecting him to attack her, but he didn't. He stopped. Just inches away from her, his hand still raised like he was pretending to grab her. My blood ran cold. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She just stood there, trembling, her wide eyes locked onto mine as if silently pleading. I waited to see if he would try to hurt her, but he didn't. He just grabbed her and raised his hand as if to stab her, but he never did. I understood and ran away. As I sped away, I caught one last glimpse of them in my side mirror. They weren't fighting. They weren't panicked. They were standing side by side, like old friends. I didn't stop driving until I reached a gas station miles down the road. My hands were still shaking as I stepped out, trying to process what I had just seen. An older man behind the counter noticed my state. "You okay, son? You look like you've seen a ghost." I hesitated, then told him about the woman and the man. His face darkened. Without a word, he turned the security monitor towards me and rewound the footage from the last few minutes. My heart stopped. The camera showed my car pulling in, but no one else was on the road. No woman, no man. He looked at me, his voice low. "You sure you saw them? Because you're the only one on that road tonight." I felt sick. I didn't answer. I just got back in my car and drove, never looking back. Not every cry for help is what it seems. Sometimes it's an invitation. It was a lonely stretch of desert highway, miles from the nearest gas station. The road stretched endlessly ahead, swallowed by darkness. I had been driving for hours, my hands stiff from gripping the wheel. My gas tank was running low, but I was sure I had enough to make it to the next town. At least I hoped. The night felt heavy, pressing in around me. My headlights barely cut through the emptiness. Every so often, I'd see something flicker in the corner of my eye, a shadow moving just beyond the road. But when I turned to look, there was nothing, just the barren land stretching endlessly. Then it happened, a sudden violent sputter from the engine. My heart pounded as the gas gauge flickered wildly, the needle plummeting to empty. I cursed under my breath and pulled over. I let it rest for a moment, hoping I could squeeze out a few more miles after a short break. After about 5 minutes, I turned the key. It finally roared back to life, but something felt wrong. The dashboard flickered for a second before stabilizing. I exhaled in relief, gripping the wheel tighter. And then in my rearview mirror, I saw the headlights. A beat-up truck, its high beams blinding me. I hadn't seen another car for almost an hour. The truck pulled up beside me, rolling to a slow stop. A man stepped out, tall, too tall. His limbs seemed too long, his movements just off. His face was obscured by shadows, but his eyes, I could see them, sharp, glinting in the moonlight. He knocked on my window, 3 slow taps. "You all right?" His voice was hoarse, almost raspy. I hesitated before rolling the window down just an inch. "Yeah, gas tank's acting weird." He nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving mine, unblinking. Then he reached into his car and pulled out a rusty old gas can. "Got some extra." Something about this felt wrong. My gut screamed at me not to take it, but I was stranded, and the next gas station was at least 30 miles away. I forced a smile. "That's really kind, but I think I'll call for help." He tilted his head slightly, like he was studying me. Then he grinned. "Phone ain't gonna work out here." I glanced down at my screen. No service. My pulse quickened. "I think I'll just wait it out." His smile faded. His fingers tightened around the gas can. Then he simply said, "Suit yourself." He turned and walked back to his truck, never looking away. I watched as he climbed in, but he didn't leave. The truck just sat there, idling. Minutes passed. Then I froze. Slowly, I turned to my side mirror. A figure was crouched near my back tire, pale, thin, hands pressed against the ground like an animal ready to lunge. My breath caught in my throat. The man in the truck hadn't come alone. I turned the key, praying the engine wouldn't fail me now. I slammed the gas pedal. The car shot forward, tires screeching against the cracked pavement. I didn't look back. I kept driving, my heart hammering against my ribs. The truck's headlights followed for a moment, then nothing. I made it to a gas station an hour later, stumbled inside, breathless. The clerk looked up lazily. "You all right?" I nodded, trying to steady myself. "Yeah, just had a weird encounter." He gave me a tired smirk. "You took the back road?" I frowned. "Yeah." His smile faded. "You're lucky, man." He tapped the counter. "People don't usually make it out of there." I felt a chill run down my spine. I turned back to the glass doors, staring out into the empty parking lot. And for just a second, I swore I saw a figure standing in the shadows, watching.